Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Reference Point. I'm your host, Dave Cokerhook. This is going to be a really interesting and I think exciting show today. So if you want to push your record button on your video, do that because I think you're going to enjoy what we're talking about. What I'm going to start with is just introducing my guests and then we'll get into the meat of the topic. So ladies first, I'd like to introduce Dee Kiesow. Hi Dee, nice to see you again, the second time to be on the show.
Nice to be back, thanks so much.
So Dee was with us once before. We were talking about how you perform services to help nonprofit organizations achieve their objectives through the kind of funding sources that they need and structure and stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to talk something about that today because you're now the executive director at an organization called Saber Six Foundation. Am I right?
You're right.
Fantastic. Well, my other guest, who is in Wisconsin right now and is with us on Zoom, Colonel Kolenda, who's a retired U.S. Army colonel and the founder of Saber Six Foundation. Chris, welcome to Reference Point.
Thank you very much for having me on your program, Dave.
It's a pleasure. So I want to start just getting into like a discussion about this organization, Saber Six Foundation. And I know that you founded it and that from what Dee had told me before, the initial objective of the foundation was to engage with members and families of Task Force Saber, which I guess was your team when you were in Afghanistan. Is that correct?
That's right. We had a task force of about 800 or so paratroopers in eastern Afghanistan in 2007 and 2008. It was a 450-day deployment.
Wow, 450 day, that's what, like a year and a quarter or almost a year and a half?
Yeah, 15 months. It was a long time. And I mean, what our paratroopers did out there was extraordinary. They motivated a large insurgent group to stop fighting and switch sides, which I think is the only time it's happened in the 20-year history of the war.
That's incredible.
It came at the cost of a lot of fighting, especially early on. And 6 of our troopers were killed in action during that deployment. And so the Saber Six Foundation was originally designed to honor them. And it was all about them. And I did last September, I did a 1,700-mile bicycle ride to visit the graves of each one of them, and then to raise funds to get the foundation started. So that ride started on September 25th, which is the 15th anniversary, 15 years to the day since Chris Pfeiffer died of wounds. So we started at his grave in central Nebraska and went all the way to Arlington National Cemetery. So that's about 1,700 miles.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. So what is the significance of the word saber?
Well, we're a cavalry unit, and so sabers are what cavalry troopers tended to carry back in the sort of Old West and days of the U.S. cavalry. And so many of the cavalry squadron commanders have their call sign as Saber, and they're called Task Force Saber, and so that's what we were.
Gotcha. So Dee, how did you get involved with Saber Six?
Well, that's a good question. So I met Chris on the East Coast at a business conference, and we were introduced that he needed someone to help him raise money. And, I have worked with, 300 different groups and nonprofits over the years. And it seemed like a little far-fetched to actually ride a bike and start a foundation, to be honest. But speaking with Chris, he was just very different than the average client. He leads with an absolute integrity and love for these troopers, and he was completely different than the typical client. So I thought, I'm going to give this a shot and see how much we can do with a bike ride, and where we can go from there. So, it was a challenge.
So the first level of action was the bike ride from Nebraska to Arlington, which was a long ways, 1,700 miles or something like that?
Yes.
And so you achieved that. And what's the next phase, Chris? Where do you go from here?
Well, just to talk a little bit more about the ride. Chris Pfeiffer, we started his gravesite in central Nebraska 15 years to the day that he died of wounds, September 25th. And then rode east and visited the graves of Adrian Hike, who's buried in Carroll, Iowa. Then continued east to Chicago, where Jacob Lowell is buried in the Abraham Lincoln National Cemetery. Ryan Fritchie is buried just outside of Indianapolis. Both he and Jake Lowell were awarded the Bronze Star for Valor for what they did in the combat eventually where they were killed. Continued east to Minersville, Pennsylvania, which is where Dave Boris rests in peace. And then finally south from there to Arlington National Cemetery. That's where Tom Bostic is buried. And Tom was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, which is our nation's second highest medal for valor for what he did that day on July 27th of 2007. And so visiting their graves and spending time with their families, spending time with the friends, people that we served with was, I mean, it was just such an extraordinary experience. And just to see people's support along the way was hugely gratifying. And I originally just conceived it as, I just want to pay tribute to our six.
Right.
And then as we started getting momentum, I thought, well, we ought to do some good with this. We ought to not only honor the dead, but serve the living.
Sure.
And, we had about 800 veterans and their families who, shoot, we can help, we can work with them to help them achieve new dreams. And so that's what the Saber Six Foundation is all about. The veterans' mental health is a challenge.
Sure.
Veteran suicide is a huge challenge. I'd be happy to dive into that. And so I thought, let's do some good, and let's continue serving our troopers who spent so much time and so much hardship defending America and helping America stay safe. Let's help them now too.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I can understand, well, I haven't personally experienced it, but I can relate to the idea and the concept of the challenge of coming from a highly intense and organized I don't know, maybe it's an organized activity like you would have in when you guys were in country, and then getting back into trying to reintegrate back into civilian life when you don't have the structure, you don't have the pressure and everything. It's got to be a challenge to be able to do that, and that makes, and I think that's where a lot of organizations are looking to try to help returning service people to kind of like reintegrate. Yeah.
Absolutely right. On 1,700 miles on a bicycle gives you a lot of time to think, and so I was thinking quite a bit about all of this. And I mean, since 9/11, over 120,000 veterans have died by suicide. By suicide. Right, and that doesn't count the other deaths of despair.
Right.
And 22 veterans reportedly take their lives daily. And then you've got many, many more who are just suffering different, many different challenges. We've got one of our best non-commissioned officers who was a top 1% leader back in 2007 and 8. He now lives in a dumpster.
Right. Yeah.
He's a meth addict. And, I can't know that people that had my back for 15 months are going through things like this.
Sure.
And not do something about it. I mean, we've lost within our own organization, within our group of 800, we've lost more now to suicide and overdoses than to enemy fire.
Right.
And so Dee Dee and I and our board and everybody in this foundation is bound and determined to not only understand why that's happening.
Right.
And I think we've got a very good grip on that. But then how you deal with it.
Okay.
How do you make the situation better?
I want to get into that a little bit, but one of the things that I'm curious about, and I think this question will lead into the explanation. There are so many organizations that are structured to help veterans and they return. What is unique about Saber Six?
Well, we work on the growth end of the spectrum. So there are a lot of organizations that deal with are into crisis intervention, crisis response.
Okay.
And that's all very necessary. They're doing incredible work, and thank goodness for them. Their interventions are, of course, after a crisis occurs. And so at that point, you're into corrective action and remedial action. And if you don't do something where people find a new sense of purpose, where they have something to look forward to, they have something to live for, they wind up in a rehab hamster wheel. In rehab and out of rehab, in rehab and out of rehab, in rehab and out of rehab. And so you've got to get to the left of the crisis, so to speak. You've got to get ahead of the crisis. You've got to get into preventive action, and that's where we're focused on. What makes us a bit different.
Cool. I can relate to the hamster wheel concept you had, because in my past I had involvement with a drug and alcohol rehabilitation program, and it's amazing how many men and women go in, come out, and they're back, and they out, and so I can relate to that. You have some information that we've got set up on like a little presentation that shows this in the graphic mode. So I'm going to ask the guys if in control room if they wouldn't call up the that information on the screen. And I want to kind of walk through this data, Chris. And as we're doing that, talk through the information. So I think one of the things that you mentioned initially that it starts out, over time, things happen, right?
Right. So the blue is where you are now. The green is future success, and the red is future despair. Now, when you look at what a lot of veterans, especially veterans who've been into combat, go through, first of all, one of the most significant things that they've ever done in their lives, maybe ever will do in their lives, happened in their early 20s.
Okay.
There's a study called the happiness curve, which states that your happiest years are in your early 20s, and then your kind of 60s and beyond. And it's shaped kind of like a U, where the bottom of the U is age 47. So
interesting.
That's also like midlife crisis. So you've got a population of people, most combat veterans, or when they're in combat, they're in their early 20s.
Right.
And they're in a situation where it's like you're surrounded by purpose.
Right.
I mean, you are defending your country in combat against people who attacked us on 9/11, people who are trying to destroy our way of life. I mean, you are surrounded by purpose. You almost take it for granted. It's so powerful. And then you've got this incredible sense of belonging. Where the person to your left and the person to your right, they get you, they've got your back, and you've got theirs.
Got it.
And then you have this feeling that there are 300 million Americans who want me to be successful.
Right.
And this is your first professional experience. I mean, this is a powerful feeling.
Yeah, I can believe it.
And you kind of ride this high, and for a lot of people, a lot of us, there's trauma involved because we lost people that we know and love. People that we served with were wounded, were killed, and so you've got not only this extraordinary experience or set of experiences, you've also got the trauma that goes with it, and then eventually you leave the military.
Right, which I guess is where we're going right now. If we can get back to the slide deck. Because once you come out, you were saying that there's this action curve, or I don't know if it's an action curve, but an actual thing that you're referring to as drift.
Yeah. So a lot of veterans face this challenge where they've left the military, and they no longer have that same sense of purpose. Like nobody teaches you how to achieve purpose in life, or how to define your purpose. And so you go from a situation where you're surrounded by it now to a situation where you're just like, it's just not the same out here.
Right.
Whether it's working for working for the dollar or working, for whatever. And and then you're like, you also have this feeling that I just don't know if I belong.
Right.
I don't know if I fit. Nobody out here gets me. Nobody out here's got my back.
Right.
People say thank you for your service, and they kind of run away because they don't know what else to say.
Right.
And then, you're like, you have these memories, some very powerful memories, some very traumatic memories, and you have the sense that, maybe I'll never be that again.
Right.
Never be that awesome again.
That I can see how that would be what this downward drift would be when you get down to the red block, which you called despair. And you had mentioned to me, or in one of the presentations I saw that you did, that there's this as you go along, that delta between where you're drifting toward or to and what would be like a normal or a maintenance level gets bigger and bigger, and then it becomes harder and harder to pull out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like compounding interest in the wrong direction, where the longer you drift, and you can only drift in one direction.
Right.
You can only drift downhill, and this combination of what you might call post-combat stress, both the sense of I'll never be at that height again, and then the experiences that you have, that plus the struggle to find new purpose and belonging, plus midlife, all the challenges that come with midlife, you can start feeling very empty.
Right.
And these memories become like a gong that's going off inside you. And if you've ever heard a gong or a bell go off in an empty building, I mean, it's painful.
Yeah.
And you can get to the point where you'll do anything to make that pain go away. And once that willingness to just do anything to make the pain go away becomes a hypnotic habit, you're into drift, and then you may have an intervention, but then you're into this kind of rehab hamster wheel.
And that's where, as you mentioned, we go back to the presentation, the corrective and remedial action that most people are doing, because they're catching the people at a point when maybe they've hit bottom, or they're struggling, or somehow or other they are introduced to an activity to try to pull them out from where they are. But you guys are set up differently. You talked about this concept of growth and becoming. I've got the next slide up on the screen now, and from what you were talking about, it's the idea is how do you take someone from the point when they're just coming out of service and help them realize that there's other opportunities so that they can have a very positive experience rather than a negative experience. Am I kind of like on target here?
Yeah, it's you can call it post-traumatic growth.
Post-traumatic growth, I like that.
Post-traumatic stress growth.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right. The idea is, you'll never be that again. I'll never be a battalion commander in combat again,
right,
ever. But I can be something different.
Right.
And I can be something different that's meaningful to me, and I can make that journey with people who matter, and I can do it in a way where I feel like I can go the distance.
Got it.
And that path is open to everybody. It doesn't matter, who you are. It doesn't matter where you served, how long you served, whether you served at all, quite frankly. That path of purpose, belonging, and well-being is open to everybody. And when you engage in that, then you become an ever better version of yourself.
Got it.
And you're constantly becoming an ever better version of yourself. And this is the preventive action.
Sure.
People who are focused on growth, who are focused on becoming ever better versions of themselves, they don't get into crisis. In fact, they help.
Makes sense.
They help others. They're role models for others.
Right. Well, they have a different purpose.
That's where we're focused.
They found a purpose. Yeah.
Exactly right.
I want to,
Exactly.
by the way, I need to ask both of you a quick question here because I think we have like 7 minutes left in this segment, and I'm hoping that you'll stick around for another segment. We're going to end off the show and then come back again and pick up where we left off. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Dee Dee?
Oh, sure.
That's okay, good. So Dee Dee, I want to ask you now. I mean, Chris has talked about the concept and in the intent, etc. Where do you see this going for yourself? How are you in a position to support the concept and help the concept become a reality?
So I'm a people person. I'm a communicator, and I'm also a fundraiser. And we have a long-term vision, and that is engaging these wonderful people and their families into activities. So we need to fund that, and so bringing the mission to the community so they can support it in a joyful way and be able to invest in wonderful people's outcomes is a mission for me. And then the long term, of course, is how can we take this program and open it up and create a repeatable, scalable opportunity for other units to do the same thing.
Got it. Because the impetus initially was for Chris, for your unit, but from everything you've said, this is a challenge across the boards for anyone who's coming back from service, and especially in a combat situation. So I can see the value for everyone. Now, is this process that we're going to talk about a little bit more? We'll probably end up diving more into it in the next segment. But is this tied to individual action, or is this a group action, or how does this work out, Chris?
It's really a combination of both individual and group action. You've got to, purpose is an individual action. You've got to determine it for yourself. Nobody can decide that for you. But you got to make the journey with other people because there's the support and the accountability there. And one of the things I just wanted to highlight is these different challenges that I mentioned, the kind of threefold challenges of post-combat stress. I'll never be that again. Some of the challenges, the traumatic experiences that go with that too, midlife, and the struggle for purpose and belonging. That's normal.
Yeah.
That is normal. Everybody goes through that. I mean, look at it. Somebody who got famous as a teenager, or in their early 20s.
Yeah.
And look at the challenges they have. Many of them have in midlife. It's a very similar thing to what a lot of veterans go through.
Sure.
So this is entirely normal. And the narrative out there that says, people are broken, is I just don't have a lot I for that.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
What you're going through is normal, and how you address it is also normal, and that's what we're trying to do is normalize that and systematize it and give people a process that they can engage in.
Got it. So we have a little less than 5 minutes left in this segment, but I have a question for you, both of you. How do you engage with someone early in this process rather than when they've really are down in the lower levels, really coming close to the despair? How do you identify, engage with, how do you get them involved early toward this growth and becoming process?
Well, right now it's a bit of a referral program, right? We have people in the unit and a membership person reaching out and, finding the 800 and bringing them into the fold. So they're going to be able to be with people who once had their back and have their back now to move forward in our programs.
Okay, that's cool. So, and that works, that makes a lot of sense because they will be receiving a communication from someone that they know, that they may have served with.
Right, and a lot of us have been in contact for the last 15 years, and that's what's kind of made starting this up easier than it might have otherwise been, just because we are so tight as an organization, and so many folks are in contact. And Dee Dee's exactly right. We're 15 years into this, and or beyond the this particular deployment. Many of us had deployments subsequent to that. We're 15 years beyond that deployment, and if people are in this sort of U-shaped curve, most people's curve is pretty normal. I mean, it's down a little bit, but most people are striving. They're in a pretty good place, but they're also approaching midlife, and that's where these things can things can sort of spiral and snowball. You've got a variety of people who are absolutely thriving. So they have found that new purpose and belonging. They have made that post-military pivot, and they are rocking the free world.
Yeah.
And then you've got people who are their curve is pretty steep, and they're passing that that gateway, or they're passing into depression, which becomes the gateway to all these sort of bad things. And so what we want to do is, if this population is kind of on a normal distribution, if you will. So about 10% struggling, about probably 10 to 20% really thriving. Most of us in the middle, kind of striving, doing our best. We want to arm people with ways to find that new purpose and belonging and well-being. Those are the three elements that are going to power your success, that are going to power you becoming an ever better version of yourself. And so that's where we're focused, and that's all the preventive action that we were describing.
Okay. Well, we've reached the point where I think I've got 45 seconds left in this segment. So that was a great point to end off on. And when we come back, going to want to dig into that a little bit more, and want to talk about the kinds of actions that Saber Six has been able to do with the folks that you've worked with thus far, and what the plans are for the future. And we're also going to talk about an event you have coming in Northern California here in a couple of months. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've been paying attention. This is, like Chris was saying, this is not just a challenge from the standpoint of returning service people. This is really life, okay? And so Saber Six has an opportunity to help people find that new purpose that they have. So, Dee Dee, thank you. Chris, thank you. We got to go now, but ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next time on Reference Point.
Awesome.